I've spent most of the last week thinking a lot about my own death. Not in a morbid way or even in a I decided to play Metal Gear Survive again kind of way, but more in terms of things being temporary. Making the most of the time we have and an acceptance that things do come to an end. This is perhaps earlier than usual for me to go off on some unnecessary philosophical tangent, but I think this line of thinking has some merit when considering discontinued video games. Not just games that aren't being made and manufactured, I'm talking about video games that for whatever reason are officially impossible to play. And I feel like that's an important detail because with enough determination and the right software, anyone can play any game that's ever existed. You got emulation, various bits of firmware, maybe just fan-made servers that have replaced official ones. But I'm more about the intention of the developers, and I'm not sure I can actively condone the dubious use of those alternatives. Through one reason or another, a game was allowed to peter out of existence, and I for one would like to look into that a little further. I'm sure that won't be hysterically depressing or anything. It's also worth remembering that in a lot of cases, owning the game from the start does help to insulate you from various discontinuations in the future, so theoretically, you can still play a game if you own it. It's not quite as drastic as a game being expensive or hard to find. What you have there is gold dust, and I would advise holding on to it. So I feel like it would be in my best interest to focus on good games. Discontinuing a bad game seems completely justified because maybe the server costs render it unprofitable or general support for the game is pointless, but a good video game never gets shut down or removed without a good reason. There's a lot more to talk about than just, it was crap, why would you keep it alive? The most common means through which a game is rendered impossible to play is being taken down from an online store. Maybe the host acts on their quality control and removes a terrible video game, or maybe a great demo gets pulled because the developer behind it decided not to make it into a full game because they're fucking idiots. Or maybe it's because anniversaries don't come around as often as we'd like. Though actually, the Legend of Zelda games come out so relatively infrequently that a new release often coincides with a significant milestone for the franchise. Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword were released on the 20th and 25th anniversaries respectively, but Nintendo have very rarely made a game specifically to celebrate the occasion. They did put Link's Awakening on the 3DS's eShop and remake Ocarina of Time, but you'd have to go back to the anniversary edition of The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords to find something considerably more elusive. The idea was to release this enhanced remastering of the original GBA game on the eShop as a part of the franchise's 25th anniversary, and again when A Link Between Worlds came out a couple of years later, but only in North America. The thing is, this game only lasted 6 months before Nintendo pulled it down in early 2012 when the celebrations were over, which I suppose makes sense, just so people weren't confused, but I still find this a little odd. Especially from Nintendo, who now have a record of keeping Zelda games alive through HD remakes and virtual console re-releases. For there to be a Zelda game out there that Nintendo have allowed to fade into obscurity and ultimately be in a position that you can't play it legally unless you bought it years ago is surprising. They added a single-player mode to this game and everything! They had the late great Robin Williams and his daughter Zelda advertised for them! It's so wholesome, I love it. Sometimes it isn't the choice of a developer to take something down from an online store. There's an element of control about that is sadly absent when the store itself is closed down. Now you might think an alert developer would be aware of this and they would simply port that game to another store on another console. But sometimes this is actually impossible. It might not have escaped your attention that the Wii Shop channel is in the process of being shut down. It's a fairly lengthy ordeal that is somehow due to take over a year to accomplish, and the most recent milestone to pass is that you can no longer add points to your account. So effectively, if you didn't have any points to spend before the 26th of March, then the Wii Shop channel is functionally dead to you. But hey, it had a good run. It helped to flesh out many a gaming library with a wide assortment of retro games and a glorious clusterfuck of original titles, and the channel itself had some damn fine theme music. Obviously, the developers in charge of some of WiiWare's most popular titles weren't stupid, so they had ports for other consoles, but there are many games on here that will likely never see the light of day again. And if they use the motion controls, they don't stand much of a chance. You remember the Wii version of Punch-Out, right? How it's like this over-the-shoulder puzzle action boxing game thing that is more about pattern recognition than wildly flailing your arms around? Yeah, well, this was all done with the standard Wii control scheme where shaking the Wii remote and nunchuck acted as a replacement for pressing a button. This is perfectly okay, but Rage of the Gladiators decided to go one step further by implementing the criminally underused Wii Motion Plus, a feature that gave games like The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword and Red Steel 2 unique one-to-one motion controls. For a WiiWare game to be this ambitious and to pull it off with such confidence is kinda crazy, really. It's a sign that some developers were taking WiiWare very seriously and were keen to embrace Nintendo's funky new technology in a way that barely anyone did. It's a shame then that you can no longer play this game as it was meant to be played. Sure, it's been ported to the 3DS and to mobile stores, but it just isn't quite the same. Especially on Android, because Rage of the Gladiators mysteriously disappeared from that store at some point last year. It deserves so much more. I feel like we've got a good mix going so far, or at least as good as things can get when talking about something so grim. It's been mostly Nintendo so far, but other developers have had issues with video games that only exist in a downloadable format. I guess that's the wider problem at play here. With a physical release, there will always be something you can buy on eBay long after it's been put out of production. Online stores are a little trickier to work around, and you end up having to spend an astronomical amount of money to buy a console with a desired game loaded onto it. Would I be willing to do that? Not for many games I can think of. 2010 saw the release of a game based on the film Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which in itself is based on the graphic novels of the same name. The film version is this stylish Edgar Wright comedy that throws around video game references for fun. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that that kind of recipe makes for a fun video game. While it lasted. It was Ubisoft who assumed responsibility of a Scott Pilgrim video game, and they deserve plenty of credit for playing to the strength of the source material by making it this almost parody side-scrolling beat-em-up. It helps keep things simple and yet irresistibly charming, and you quickly find yourself being swept up in the aesthetic with Anna Managuchi slamming out this punky chiptune soundtrack. It's a wonderfully wholesome combination, but then everything went spectacularly wrong in late 2014 when Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, was removed from both Xbox Live and PlayStation Network. No official statement was made, which leads me to believe that publishing contracts between Ubisoft and the creators of Scott Pilgrim simply ran out, with there being no great desire to renew them. But they do know that this game has a decently large cult following, right? There are so many other games where this lack of support would make sense, but not here. Around the time the game was pulled, there were rumours of additional DLC being added. How can you go from one great extreme to another without even blinking? It's the work of some maniacal supervillain. Not every game that loses its way is a victim of some online store shenanigans. That would be ignoring one of the most popular means of interacting with a digital video game that engulfs the lives of millions around the world and allows them to interact with others in a massive online world. I am, of course, talking about massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMORPGs. And these games suffer perhaps more than any others when a developer decides to call it a day for whatever reason. Shutting the servers down isn't as extreme as taking the game down in its entirety, but it still achieves the same effect. It's more like permanently locking a door instead of knocking a building down. You're still not getting inside anytime soon. When you think about it, MMORPGs have been around for a fairly long time, but obviously the online component in there means that we didn't have games like this in, say, the 1980s or something. That means we have a relatively recent starting point of roughly the year 2000, and that is a very long time for servers to be dead. A bit of deep research into the history of MMORPGs will tell you that there were plenty of games under that banner before the turn of the century, but from that point onwards you can see an upturn in quality of these massive online games. To many people, Phantasy Star Online was their first taste of an MMORPG, and on a broader level, was one of the first watershed moments for online gaming on a console. This is Sega and Sonic Team of all people sharing their valuable foresight with the world and changing how we see both MMORPGs and online gaming in general. Damn guys, where did it go so wrong? Oh yeah, I remember. In Japan, Sega sold the game with a free year of internet access and a demo disc for Sonic Adventure 2, which has to be one of the best value for money deals in the history of video games, really. Unsurprisingly, the game was a roaring success, and Sega started pumping out expansions and sequels, but in 2007, the public servers were shut down so focus could be shifted to other projects. There are still fan-made private servers, which I think speaks volumes to the following this game has, but officially, Phantasy Star Online is dead. What is doubly disappointing is that Phantasy Star Online 2 hasn't made it out of Japan since it was launched in 2012, with Sega repeatedly saying that they'd do something about that only to get distracted by some pretty lights or something. Nah guys, you focus on running Sonic into the ground, there's absolutely nothing else you could be doing instead. It's not much to ask for, really. If we consider that all of these games are functionally dead, then it stands to reason that everybody would look at them and perceive them as dead video games. That's a phrase that doesn't get passed around a lot these days, since we tend to keep certain iconic video games at the forefront of our cognition. We don't want to believe that a discontinued video game can be considered something that has expired over time. The best example I can give is the Wikipedia pages for each of these games I've talked about thus far. Every single one refers to the game in the present tense, saying it is a video game that came out at a certain time to a degree of success. This is important because with Club Penguin, they use the word was, like a dead celebrity. Wikipedia has its other uses as well, like confirming for me that Club Penguin is in fact a video game and not just an ethereal website that was only spoken of in hushed whispers. For me, Club Penguin was a mainstay of internet culture. Maybe not as lofty as stupid websites like Twitter and YouTube, but something I've been aware of to some capacity ever since it was launched in 2005. It's a fairly simplistic home for minigames that allow players to chat with any number of the millions of active users at the peak of the site's popularity, which in 2014 was illustrated by there being 250 million registered users. Due to the nature of the site and its popularity, strict kid-friendly safety measures were put in place to ensure the security of everyone using it, which in turn meant that most parents were okay with their child signing up to Club Penguin. It's a rosy setup and one that made Disney a lot of money after they bought the site in 2007, but the pressures of modern technology often encourage large companies to do stupid things, like closing Club Penguin down. The idea was to replace the Club Penguin website with a mobile app called Club Penguin Island and to make a few graphical upgrades along the way. The problem is that the version of Club Penguin that has replaced the site has received numerous bad reviews for not really working correctly, hiding the majority of its features behind a monthly $5 subscription fee, and for simply being too far removed from the original website. I feel like you avoid most of these problems if you simply allow the game to be played on mobile devices via a port rather than a completely rebuilt application, so you're appealing to the mobile market while keeping existing fans happy. Doing something this drastic after 12 years of success is a genuinely terrible idea. It is cutting off your own nose to spite your face on a massive scale, and it makes the closure of Club Penguin the only truly negative case on this list. And I wouldn't be proud of that. This is RabbidLuigi, and part of the reason why Disney decided to close Club Penguin is because they felt they needed to move elsewhere so they could keep the name alive, and they certainly put it back in the news as millions flocked back to Club Penguin in order to tip icebergs and see out its final moments, but at what cost? How much faith do you have that any of those are going to make the switch to the mobile app? It's temporary relevance, and it will ruin you. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.